Hi friends, this is Anna, and before we get into today's episode, which we are very excited about, I just want to preemptively apologize for the sound quality of our interview today. When we were recording, we didn't notice any issues, everything sounded great, but as soon as I sat down to edit and started listening, I was like, oh no. So I have done my best to make adjustments on my end, including adding certain effects to make the sound a little bit more natural, likewise adjusting the volume on everyone speaking. So if that is noticeable, that is the reason why. Again, we apologize, the sound quality isn't going to be great, but we are very excited for this interview. Just a reminder, we are two gals recording a podcast remotely. We don't have professional equipment, but we do have a lot of passion. So thank you for showing us that grace, and we hope that our sound quality will improve in the future as time goes on. So thank you so much for listening, and on to the episode. And I'm Anna Dowaher.
And this is the Reclaiming the Garden podcast. Today we have on one of my best friends, Brianna da Silva. She is a debut author as of last week, really exciting. As of the time we're recording this outro, it was last week. And yeah, it was just really fun to be able to talk with her about, her faith journey and, her passion for storytelling and how that's changed during her sort of faith deconstruction and journey out of Christianity. I should also say something I forgot to actually talk about during the interview was sort of how we met, because I sort of allude to we met after we were deconstructing, even though we had sort of been going to the same church. And that's because for one thing, we've got a 5-year age difference, and so that affected, we would never meet in youth group because we were not in, I was in middle school, she was in high school, and then, graduated by the time I was in high school. But she also wasn't really even into youth group anyway. She mostly just went to the adult service. So, and it's also, of course, especially by the time that we were both, nearing the end of, attending there, it was, really big, and so, we wouldn't have encountered each other anyway. Though, of course, I did meet her. I met her sister when I was in 6th grade, and somehow, she never introduced me to her. So, so that's how that happened, and, it was just so nice to have her on.
I don't recall if you mentioned this, but she also designed our fabulous logo.
Right, yeah.
So the pink with the magenta and purple flowers. She designed our logo.
I asked her how she made that. She had to overlay the flower it was a single image, and she had to overlay it to make a design, which I was like, whoa.
I had no idea. That's so cool.
Yeah. So at the end of the episode, we'll let you know how you can purchase her book, and also follow her on all the socials. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
In addition to being one of my best friends and the person who created the logo for our podcast, Brianna da Silva is a proud geek who loves real-life adventure just as much as the imaginary kind. With a bachelor's degree in digital arts and design from Full Sail University, Brianna keeps a busy schedule, divided between freelance graphic design, working on indie films, and of course, writing novels. When she's not working, she spends her time devouring books, practicing Krav Maga, and hiking in the pine-covered mountains of Colorado. Welcome to the show. I've been so excited to have you on.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess we'll start off with the sort of question, or not quite a question, but it's the thing that we start off with always. So tell us about your faith background.
My faith background, so I grew up evangelical. I was very much a self-proclaimed Jesus freak, meaning I literally had that as my description on Facebook once under religion. I was very, very passionate, and then ended up changing my perspective on things, I guess, in my early 20s, earlier, in mid 20s. That's a very short version, but.
I guess, did your faith journey and then your journey into the creative arts, I guess, how did you realize you wanted to work in a more creative field?
Well, that has always been the case since I was a tiny child. So that's
you started, what's interesting, you started writing this like your novel that's soon to be released in a few days, while you were actually still evangelical, and part of your faith deconstruction involved a massive overhaul of that manuscript.
Yeah, that's a good angle to talk about that. So I've always been a writer, and like when I was younger, especially as a teenager, like as I said, I was very passionate. So my perspective was that like I was going to write stories to help like bring more people to Jesus. I guess was kind of like my motivation.
That was my motivation too when I was writing fantasy novels in high school as an evangelical.
Which is kind of like, it's interesting because of a purpose that was, you know, externally placed upon me, which some people think that like having a purpose that is like something that is, you know, given to you is like supposed to be more meaningful. But I found eventually when I kind of found my own purpose, it was a lot more meaningful, just more personalized. That's another story, but or a side note, I guess. And so it was weird because like April mentioned, I started writing it, I guess, about 7.5 years ago. So at that point, I was still deeply in that culture and in that worldview. And I don't know, I guess it was like 2 or 3 years into that when I was having the deconstruction. So then it was like, it would have been finished a lot sooner, but I just had this sudden, like, I don't even know what I'm trying to write. I don't know what I want to say. I don't even know what I want to do as a writer anymore. Just like my purpose before was completely gone, and so I had to create new meaning. So eventually, just also due to just learning how to write better, because it was your first novels are always going to be the worst. And so there was a lot of rewriting that happened. Part of that was like making it clear and stuff, which was very different from the original fiction. Yeah, that was quite an experience. It's a very different book from what it started as.
Yeah, and so you talk about your deconstruction. Do you want to go more into that, how it sort of happened, and particularly how you started to discover your queer identity in the midst of that?
Yeah, that's such a long story. Oh boy.
We love long stories on the show. Do it.
Yeah, whatever rabbit holes you would want to go down.
God, I feel like overwhelmed. It's so interesting because like there's so many different things that can contribute to something that complex, especially when, you know, if it's something that is just your total world, to have like your total world shift, like there's a lot of pressures that have to come like to do that, because we're so, I think it's just like human nature. We're very, how would you put it? Like, we really want to keep the status quo. It's very like psychologically comfortable. So there were a lot of things that happened. I mean, I definitely, like, when I was very young, so I'm a lesbian, which you got, of course. What I believed was that, like, lesbians were people that were really, I didn't even know that, like, bi was an option, but, like, I knew that, like, if you were gay in some way that, or if you were trans, it was the same story, that, like, you probably had some sort of trauma in your childhood or something, and, like, that you would, that it wasn't possible to, like, arrive at that, whatever, psychological disorder or whatever, if you were a Christian. So I just didn't think that was possible for me. But I noticed sometimes, like, when I was really, like 13, I would say, maybe younger, I guess 11 would be the first time that I noticed that, I would still, like, have attraction to girls. And I would explain it away as, like, the devil was trying to tempt me or something. And so I just, like, suppressed that. And it was something I didn't really want to think about for a long time, but it was something that was there. And then it just, I kept trying to make so many excuses for why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And there came a point in college where I was having a hard time convincing myself anymore. And I started to wonder, I had this moment when I was, I guess, about, I don't know, 22, 23 or something like that, I guess, maybe 22, where I distinctly remember I was on the metro on my way home from work, and I was just, like, looking out the window, and I was thinking about the ways that I kind of felt different, because, like, I'm kind of like I consider myself like a soft switch, like, I'm definitely more masculine, and that was another aspect of myself that I was always suppressing. And, you know, I just felt like kind of different in certain ways than I always had, and, you know, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about the way that I had those thoughts about girls too, and my conclusion was that, oh my goodness, I must be one of those people that if I wasn't a Christian, I would be a lesbian. Like, I must be one of those people that, like, has those particular temptations, but that's how the devil would get me. And it disturbed me so much. It was like, Oh no, that's horrible. I don't want to think about that anymore. And something that was interesting though was that I ended up reading. I found this blog called, oh, what's it called? You two might know what I'm talking about, but it's one of those like, it's a blog with a bunch of gay guys who are Christian and who believe that it's wrong to act on.
Oh, like side B people?
Side B, that's
yeah.
Yeah, it's called. I'm trying to remember. I can see the image, the blog in my mind. Your Other Brothers, something like that. I think it's Your Other Brothers, something like that. And it was a bunch of stories of these guys just talking about their lives and talking about their experiences, and the more I read it, the more I was like, this just doesn't make any sense, because clearly all of them are not able to stop being gay. They're just choosing to be celibate, or they're choosing whatever they're choosing to, marry someone they're not attracted to, and that disturbed me even more. Because I was like, well, that doesn't seem fair. And I'd also been like really struggling with the sort of the gender roles that I was taught. So we definitely I definitely grew up with this mindset that I could be whatever I want to be. That we were really encouraged, and my family especially, I would say, a certain level of like gender equality, I would say, but with the exception of in the church or in a marriage, where women are still supposed to submit to men. And I really struggled with that. It was like so against my nature. I'm like, I want to submit to anyone. I'm like, is that what God wants? I don't know. And I struggled with that for like a decade. I would just go back and forth. I remember I had like an argument once with like this ultra conservative guy. I was like 17. We were like arguing about like the theology of it and stuff. And it really bothered me. But what finally had all these things kind of coalesce and start to be this was pretty slow, which is funny because it literally was one for me. But there was someone in my life who was following this kind of theology, and she was, submitting to her husband and all that. And her husband ended up cheating on her, and he ended up, and she was terrified. And she was like, she suddenly felt like he was a totally different person. She didn't know, she didn't know who he was anymore. And she was just like, sharing this with me. She's like on the floor, like crying about it. Like she didn't know how to take care of herself financially. Like she didn't know what was going on. And I was just sitting there comforting her. I was like, well, this sucks. This clearly doesn't work because she's vulnerable. He was the one that was supposed to protect her. But of course, he's a human, and humans are also, they do things that are wrong. And there was just this moment where I was like, I don't care what the Bible is actually telling me or not. I don't care. This is wrong. If this is clearly wrong, this is clearly degrading to women, this idea, so I reject it. And that mindset was me finally being like, I think for myself about that. And thinking about that, getting rid of those gender roles, suddenly being against a gay marriage made no sense anymore. And so that was basically just spiraled after that. Started asking more and more questions and doing all sorts of research, and then she changed my mind on like almost everything, not everything, but almost. But yeah, that was kind of what led to it all, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you did eventually. Although you sort of had a foray in progressive Christianity, you did eventually decide that you were not a Christian, that you were an atheist. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for me, because I thought about this a lot, I had a conversation with you, April, about this, because we had similar backgrounds, so we ended up at very different places. We had almost the exact same background, really. And I was asking you about what it was about Christianity that so that drew you to it, and you were telling me that it was Jesus, obviously, because that's what Christianity is about. And I think for me, what I ultimately realized was that even though I called myself a Jesus freak, the character person of Jesus was never really that important to me. If you had said that to me when I was 17, I would have been really offended. But it was true. The New Testament wasn't what I connected with. It was always the Old Testament. It was always this personal relationship with God, who was this very disembodied kind of it was a very personalized space that I had, and I wasn't really into being in the church at all. I didn't really care about church, so it wasn't really the religion of Christianity that was ever really all that important to me, even though I thought it was. It was more this sort of personal faith, and so I very naturally kind of shifted to a more what would you call that? Like a blanking on the term, mystic, like a sort of mystical perspective. And I was at one of those queer Christian.
Well, the one I think when you attended, because you told me about this before, I think it was still a gay Christian network. I think it was probably the last year that it was Gay Christian Network before it. Now it's called Q Christian Fellowship. So
Q Christian Fellowship. Yeah. So I was there, and I thought those were going to be my people, and I realized that like they were. There was this point where like everyone was doing this for like worship songs and everything, and I was standing there, I'm like, I just don't like connect with this. It's just isn't really all that meaningful to me personally. I think that the figure of Jesus is a great figure. It's not really like one that really draws me all that much. And so then I kind of like left the conference, and I was like, it's almost over. I think I'm just done. And I was like, I'm not a Christian. Like it took like a year or so after my deconstruction to get to that point. And then about a year or two later, eventually I realized that like sort of the mystical side of me wasn't really there anymore either. There really wasn't anything that I believed in anymore. So I was like, I guess I became an atheist. So I sort of became what they warn you. Question.
You fell down the deconstruction rabbit hole and ended up,
an atheist lesbian.
No.
Oh no!
Oh my god.
It's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you brought up the point about us like having a very similar background. I mean, I guess I'll say like we did spend our adolescence at the exact same church, and but we did end up in these two very different places. And actually, when we met, we were already like basically in those different places. We actually didn't know each other when we attended and when we were like in evangelicalism.
But you knew my sister, which is kind of funny.
Yes, right? Yeah, she was one of my first friends in youth group, and actually, technically, you attended the first summer church camp that I went to, which is just funny to think about. But of course, they separated the middle schoolers and high schoolers, so of course we wouldn't have crossed paths. But anyway, I guess I think something that's cool about our friendship is like, I feel like in church we were warned that like, oh, you shouldn't get too close to like your non-Christian friends because they'll pull you away from the faith. And it's like, no.
Or like they'll cause you to stumble.
It's like, you respect my faith and why I've stayed, and then I also respect like that you left and why you left. So I think that's really cool, and I think that's a thing that's actually pretty common in the ex-evangelical community. I mean, certainly there is conflict and drama, like in any community, but I think it's cool that like despite so many differences in where people end up, there is a sense of like solidarity and that like we've been through some shit, so we gotta stand together.
Yeah.
Yes, I very much value that about our friendship too.
Yeah. Oh, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up. You had a purity ring? You had a purity ring!
I did, and the funny thing about that is that I just lost it one day. Like, I literally, like I used to wear it, like, on this ring, which is so funny, because, like, I was so innocent, I didn't even think about the fact that I was wearing it on my middle finger. Like, that's kind of weird. But that's what I wore it on that finger for years and years and years and years, and then sometimes it would, like, slip off, because it was, like, a little bit too big, I guess. And then one day it, like, slipped off, and I never found it again. And at that point, I was already, like, I was still, like, it was before my deconstruction, but I was kind of a little disillusioned from some of the, like, purity culture stuff already. Kind of. I was, at that point, I had been really into, my parents' teachers. I read a bunch of books about the sort of, like, courtship.
Wait, did you read I Kissed Dating Goodbye?
I didn't read that one. I read, like, so many of the other ones that were inspired by that, funny enough. I never ended up getting around to reading them, even though I'd always meant to. I was very influenced by, what are their names? Eric and Leslie Moody, I think. I might be mixing up the names somewhat, but they're husband and wife. They wrote the story, When God Writes Your Love Story.
Oh my God.
Oh dear.
And it had such bad influence on me. Like, really, like, I was just such a passive person just waiting around for, my true love to come, basically. And when that didn't go the way I expected it to, I got really disillusioned. And so when I lost it, I was like, okay. Oh well. And later I was kind of glad. It's like, what would I would have done with it anyway? I just thrown it away, I guess. I don't know.
Well, interesting thing, I don't know if you ever heard about this, but the pastor, Nadia Bowles-Weber, it took a bunch of purity rings, melted them down, and made a vagina sculpture out of it. So...
I think that's the only thing you can do with your discarded purity rings, honestly. Also, I'm curious to know, did you like participate in like a purity ball, or was it like was it through your church, or was that like at the time a decision you had made for yourself?
It was your dad, right? Your dad like took you out to dinner. It was like weird,
yeah,
right?
That was the thing we did. That was kind of like a family thing we did. Although I don't know what else ended up with a purity ring. I wonder why that was. Well, yes, I can imagine some reasons why, but I won't get into that. Well, each of the kids. I come from a big family, and there are 6 kids total. I'm the oldest of 6, and each of us kind of grew up very, very differently, which is interesting. Like, we each have kind of like come to different conclusions too, and some of those differences were starting while young, so maybe that's why I was feeling that in depth with the purity. But so it was like my dad took me to dinner once, and then we like prayed together or something. It was into the ring. Yeah. It feels weird now, though.
Oh yeah.
At the time, it didn't feel weird. It felt really sweet. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's like that thing of like, now you know better, and like it's that thing of hindsight where that is a really sweet gesture, but once you kind of fall into that trap of purity culture and like you realize, wait a minute, there are some not great implications behind a lot of this, and I'm agreeing to something when I don't entirely know what I'm agreeing to, then that's when you can kind of look at the hindsight and be like, oh, it's because I know that in my church we've been talking about lately, like, some things were bad in youth group, but remember that they did serve you. Like, they must have served you at some point, and it's okay to like, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, you can keep the good things you got from something, but like, feel free to discard any of the toxicity attached to it, which that's kind of what that reminded me of.
Yeah, I that's something that I feel like has been a little bit of a realization that I've had recently, because I've definitely gone through all sorts of different phases as one does, kind of like almost like stages of grief, kind of. I don't know if it was exactly one stages of grief, but there's some aspects of that. There was a period of a lot of anger that I had, like, towards all of my background and everything, and to like very irrational degrees. And then, but eventually, I was able to kind of recognize some of the things that, from my background that I still stay with me, which is why I said earlier, it's like a change of mind at almost everything, but not everything. Like, there's certain things certain values, that came from that culture that I still hold in, I still find valuable, and I think it's very healthy to be able to like acknowledge things like that, especially if you've experienced harm from something like that, and it's hurt you, to be able to get to the point where you're not just like angry at the whole thing. So it's not healthy, and it's usually not true either. Maybe sometimes it's true, but I don't think it's usually going to be true that it's like all bad that you've experienced. It's like a whole religion or something like that.
What are some of the values that have stayed with you?
Oh man, you got me up guard. I wrote a bunch of these down a while ago. I think one example, this is a really easy one that like goes to some of the things that I was mentioning earlier, which is that, I used to think that like I was trying to, write stories and create media that would like bring people to God, and that was because I believed that the kinds of stories we tell matter. And that there is like an influence that has in culture, and like that's a perspective that I still have. I just think that it's like different things that I want to say, but I still kind of have that like passion behind writing stories, where it's not just entertainment. I'm putting like air quotes around that, just entertainment, because it's also fine to be just entertainment. Nothing wrong with that. Good to take breaks and rest, and entertainment can be that for you. But for me personally, I find a lot of meaning in storytelling, and that's something that I think is very like the Christian filmmaking community, which I used to be really deeply involved in. That's a very central value that they have, and so the Christian filmmaking community is like a very heavily like evangelical. yeah, it was
Oh my gosh, wait, did you ever watch God's Not Dead? I guess I'm wondering, were you still, you might have still been, evangelical when it came out. Yeah, I was thinking.
Yeah, they're coming out with a fourth one.
And it's about, you might have an interesting perspective on this as someone who was homeschooled. So I think the plot of the fourth is that they're going after homeschooling parents about, like, regulating the homeschooling environment.
It's, I could tell you so much about that culture, because, like, the thing is like, there was this whole dichotomy of so many of the, like, evangelical Christian movies that would come out, and I don't know if it's improved because I haven't watched them in years, but, like, 10 years ago or so when I was involved in this stuff, like, all just so cheesy. The thing was that, like, filmmakers knew that, like, Christian filmmakers, something we'd all talk about, like, we don't want to make Christian, like, cheesy movies, like, we want them to just, like, normal stories that anyone can experience. But the problem was that it's, like, almost unavoidable. And the reason why I've realized that now is that, because I've experienced this now, not just in Christian films, I've experienced this in, like political stories too. Like, if you come to a story, and this almost seems like it's contradicting what I said before, but it's not. I'll explain. You come to a story, like, with a set agenda of, like, some sort of, this message, like, this really precise message that's, like, ideological, political, something like that, and that's what you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to communicate. It's always going to come across as inauthentic and false, because your primary motivation isn't just to tell a story, and you're not, like, applying storytelling principles first, and it just always will come across as inauthentic. So you have to understand how to, like, it's not a message that you're telling, it's more like a theme.
A story. We're telling a story, and the point is to tell a good story.
Right, and there always should be a moral implication. It's interesting because I thought that only Christians cared about that, and I remember I had a particular screenwriting instructor or professor or whatever when I was younger that said the same thing. I was like, oh, really? That's what everyone thinks. A good story should have some sort of a moral implication, but it's not going to be like some, like, really precise thing, like like, I think, for example, of, like, I watched the movie with my mom years ago. It's like a non-Christian example of this. It was an adaptation of one of Ayn Rand's books, and it came across just so inequitable. There's a very specific political agenda that the story had. It was trying to tell you, like, capitalism is good, and you're like, okay, like, your whole story just arranges around that. Instead, you want to tell something like, when you're fighting the monster, don't become one. Like a principle like that. It's like, revenge is bad. Like, family's the most important thing in the world. Like, that's the kind of, like, thing that's deeper. And you can imply some of those more complex messages, but it has to be very subtle.
Yeah, and one thing I watched a video on this once about, like, the God's Not Dead series, and they said, like the person who, I will link this video, I guess, when we release the episode so people can watch it, but it was like how the wrong message is being sent because it's such an alienating message to people that aren't in this very specific subset of Christianity, because the person who made the video was like, I went to a Newsboys concert because they wrote the God's Not Dead song, and when they showed, like, one of the atheist characters on screen, the whole audience booed. And it's like, what if someone had brought, like, their atheist friend, their agnostic friend, just, again, or friend that is outside of that evangelical Christian bubble to that concert, and they saw that? Like, you're not bringing people in with your media, regardless of what bringing people in means, at least bringing them into a bigger story. You're othering people that aren't like you, and you're pushing them away, and that's the lesson that's being taken away from that sort of thing.
And it could totally be done. There's an example, and I was just thinking about this recently, of a sort of, like, at least I expect it was an evangelical Christian career because it was very pro-life with the message. But there's this movie, I think it's called Zealous, and it was a great example of that. It was a story that was just, it was just a story about a woman who was pregnant, and she was thinking it was an unexpected pregnancy, she was thinking about getting an abortion, and she spends this day with this other guy, her former coworker, and they're just, like, hanging out, and he ends up telling a traumatic past story where he accidentally hit a kid when he was, like, a long time ago, and killed the kid with his car, and he ends up, you never hear him actually persuading her not to have the abortion, but it's implied that somewhere along the way, she ends up deciding to let him adopt the child, and then and it becomes like his redemption. So like that's a way that you can have a sort of that like a message that kind of community want to tell, but it's a good story. It's not like
you don't have the atheist get hit by a car at the end of the movie and then have a like final breath
deathbed conversion.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Forgot about that.
When I remember telling my sister about that, and she was already an atheist at the time, and so she was like, "Oh my god, that's horrible," and I was like, "But he went to heaven." My evangelical ass actually said that. Like, I somehow thought that was a good fucking thing. Like,
yeah, and it's so funny because I've seen like. Again, there's so many videos online about, like, just people relentlessly mocking the God's Not Dead series. And one of the people's like, okay, like, these pastors, like, they find this man who's gotten hit by a car, and the first thing they don't do is call an ambulance, but they're like, you're dying, we're gonna pray over you.
It's so messed up. Those movies are laughable. They're very laughable.
And it's sad because that seems to kind of be on the whole with most Christian media, and especially, again, like, it's much more overtaken by evangelicalism, but that just seems to be the case, is they're not good. It's just, they're just not good.
I remember having pretty good memories. I mean, maybe this just was because I was still evangelical when I saw this movie, but Soul Surfer, like, I feel like that, when I look back, I'm like, that doesn't seem too bad or cheesy.
That's because Soul Surfer wasn't made in the indie Christian community. That was made in Hollywood, but I think there were some Christians that were involved, so that's why that one was different.
Yeah.
So speaking of storytelling and media, your book comes out in 2 days, right? Yeah. How do you feel?
Yeah, it does. I'm getting that question. It's unfortunate. I'm so burned out. It's like, it's bad. This is my first book launch, and I'm self-published because I wanted to experience all the marketing, and I realized how overwhelming it is to do it yourself. And so I'm very burnt out, and wish I could say I was more excited or something. But
I mean, you've done a great job with your website, though. Like, I saw that when I clicked on it, it said the offer for, like, see a preview of City of Reckoning. Like, it looks like you've done a great job, so.
And I do want to ask, though, I know that your book comes out in 2 days. Yeah.
The 21st, so it's at time of recording.
The 21st.
Days, so, yeah.
Okay, so by the time this episode's released, the book will have been released. Get the book, it's great.
It's gay!
Yeah,
it's great and it's gay.
I would say it's a very like bi positive book. The gayness is a little bit less there, though there will be more of that, I would say, in people. But yeah, it's definitely very LGBT, so we should say that. Yeah, so it is so City of Reckoning is a big epic fantasy novel about a group of young warriors who get caught up in a war and begin to wonder if they're fighting to the wrong side. And it's got epic journeys and wolf companions, winged people, and it deals with themes like trauma and revenge. So that's kind of the rundown of it. And it's a really big book, so it's like, if you like really big epic fantasy stories that are like really immersive, a lot of in-depth world building, it'll be your thing. If you don't like that kind of thing, don't read it. But if you like that kind of thing, it's for you. So yeah.
That sounds so awesome. I can't wait to read.
Yeah, it's been such a journey to get this out. But the first of many.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to write lots of fiction novels. It's kind of surprising it took me this long. But as I kind of explained already, there's a reason why it took so long for my first.
You also have a little poetry book, right? That's actually about like your deconstruction. Yeah. So that's cool too.
I do. This will probably be more relevant to more of the readers. I mean, more of the listeners to the podcast. I did write a poetry book called A Canvas of Stars. And it's on Amazon only. The City of Reckoning, the fantasy book will be everywhere, but it is everywhere already. Yeah, A Canvas of Stars is basically, while I was in the midst of my deconstruction, I wrote a bunch of poetry as a way to like process my feelings and my thoughts. And as I was, discovering my sexuality at the time, I thought I was bi because compulsive heterosexuality is a thing. So I had years of convincing myself that I liked guys because I was supposed to. So eventually I realized it was lesbian. But at the time I wrote that, it was for the perspective of someone who was quote unquote figuring out that she was bi. And yeah, it's a very like raw, like personal bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Candy the Stars.
That's awesome. And I mean, I guess going back to your soon-to-be-released novel, are you inspired? Like, is there any particular author or series that, like, inspires your own writing style?
Definitely. There's a handful that I would say have been most influential on me. Two that come to mind immediately are Pierce Brown, who wrote the sci-fi series Red Rising, the Red Rising trilogy. I was very influenced by the way he writes characters and also just like the general tone and style of the story. It's very much like my style of writing. I was like, what? It exists in the world. Maggie Stiefvater, especially with, I never know if I'm saying her name right, but especially with her Raven Cycle, another series that really inspired me a lot with character development. And then I was also really influenced by The Hunger Games because this is something that The Hunger Games and Red Rising does this really well, where I have a frustration where a lot of fictional stories that deal with violence, like, is especially prevalent in like fantasy and sci-fi, but I think it happens in all sorts of different genres. But you'll deal with this like violence and these really disturbing things, and your characters just like keep going. Like they don't have any realistic reactions to what they've experienced and what they're doing. Those two series do that really well, where it's like there's genuine trauma that is specific to that character, like how that character would react, and they don't gloss over any of that. Yeah.
Cool. I guess, is there anything like that you've learned from your whole journey that you feel like has ended up in the book in some way, like not just maybe in the queerness of the characters, but also like in other themes?
Definitely. I would say, in fact, like, because at first I had something I was trying to say as an evangelical, and then eventually I had to figure out what it was I actually wanted to say with the story. And I would say I was very much influenced by my observations with other people like myself, people who have had traumatic experiences with, either like religious trauma or just in general, like someone's been discriminated against, and it's easy for that to make you very angry. Like I mentioned before, like I had a season where I was very angry, and that can be really destructive. And sometimes I think people don't really allow themselves to heal in like a healthy way from some of that trauma, and sometimes that can lead to very dark outcomes. And I've seen that in people. I've seen people just like choose, very like just disturbing mindsets and actions, and sort of taking it out against the world instead of finding what it is that's hurting yourself and and dealing with that instead of like externalizing that. And so that was part of what the story is about, because the main character is going through that kind of process, and actually several of them are. So it's fundamentally a story about trauma at the backdrop of revolution and war and all that stuff, but it's a story about people that have all experienced really terrible things, and they still have to decide to do the right thing, because it doesn't matter how much you have been harmed, it never justifies you then going and doing harm. People can abuse you, that doesn't mean you can go abuse others, the desire for revenge and retribution is very dangerous and dark thing. I think people that have experienced negative things are vulnerable to that, and so that's kind of like where a lot of those observations are poured into the story. There's like a warning there. It's like, if you experience trauma, make sure that you are able to get the feeling that you need and not take that out on other people. Because it doesn't matter how justified you are. Feeling angry, you're not justified to then go and do the wrong thing.
Where do you like to go adventuring? I partially already know the answer to this question because I recently visited Brianna.
You've done a lot of adventuring with me, so so I live close to like the Rocky Mountains, I guess I'm closer to the like Boulder Range. What is that called?
The Flatirons, right?
The Flatirons, yes, exactly those. And about like 30 minutes away from them. So when I go outside, I just like look and they're right there and they're so big and beautiful. And the best thing about living there is I just, anytime I leave the house, I'm like, and they're pretty decent driving distance. So I will go to various areas of the mountains. There are a lot of different places that I've taken April to, the main ones, I guess the main three areas that I really love. And yeah, so I would love to have more of the outdoor adventures. I feel like I do the minimal that I could, what I should probably do more, because I love that I'm close to things, but I still do hike a lot more than I did when I lived in Virginia before I moved here, so there is that.
That's amazing to have such a abundance of mountain ranges where you live.
So beautiful, like especially I would say in like late spring, like oh my god, because you get snow that's still on the mountains. You see a little bit of like some white specks on the mountains, and then flowers in the fields, and it's just like so beautiful. Yeah. Right now,
that's amazing.
Because everything's dry, but I still love it.
What are your hopes for the future, whether that be in just like things generally or like ideas for future projects?
That's a potentially shallow or deep question. I want to write like lots of books, lots of sapphic books of very adventure heavy sci-fi and fantasy stories, and I love where I live, so I will stay here hopefully for the rest of my life. And I want a family one day. That's one thing that I don't have that I would, a second family. And I think that covers. I would like to have some pets. I can't at the moment, but so that's sort of a personal and professional thing. I'm also a filmmaker. It hasn't been like as big of a thing in my life lately, but I did return to that, even though like I took a big break after being in the indie Christian film scene. So I've gotten into some other indie films and stuff, but yeah, I think that kind of summarizes it. Lots of things that I want to create, and yeah, a lot of stories I want to tell.
Can't wait to witness all of the creations.
Brianna's novel, City of Reckoning, at the time of the release of this episode, is available for purchase on pretty much lots of places, right? Online, I guess. So,
yep.
Where can people reach you on social media and the internet?
I'm most active on Twitter, and that's just like my name, but there's an underscore, just like Brianna _da Silva. There's 2 N's in Brianna. And I'm also on Instagram as curious _storyteller. So I'm not very active
nice.
There. And you can find a Facebook page too, my author page. It's like you're on Facebook, but not really Facebook. Those are the main places. Sure. I also have a blog, briannadasilva.blog, and in case anyone needs the full spelling, it's BriannaDasilva.
Nice. We'll have that in the show notes as well. Brianna, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, guys.
We're working on an outro song. This is just the placeholder. Yeah!
So if you're interested in supporting any of Brianna's work, such as her book or her her directorial debut, which is a online YouTube series called The Cultists, you can find that on all her social medias, links in her bio, all that jazz. And then, Anna, do you want to talk about ways that people can support our podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely be sure to check out our Patreon. We will be uploading more exclusive content on there once we get more patrons.
We're also rethinking a little bit about, the perks and whether there are different things that we could offer to attract more people. So if you guys have any ideas about that, we would really appreciate it. We are also definitely going to be launching merch. Hopefully our goal is to launch merch around November. That way people can get stuff for the holidays, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, we have some fun merch ideas, but we also want to hear from you. Likewise, of course, you can follow us on all social media, including Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, if you're listening on YouTube, that's cool. I don't think a lot of people are. I know we have a couple.
I know that our purity culture episodes probably has the most like views just because it uses the buzzword. I bet women in the Bible will also get views that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course, feel free to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, because again, that really does help boost us in the algorithm. But otherwise, just thank you for listening and thank you for supporting us however you are able. We're so grateful to have people listening.
I'm very appreciative of we've actually gotten a recent sort of flux in listens on the Alicia Crosby interview, which has been really cool to see. When you search on Spotify right now, Alicia Crosby, we're one of like the top podcast episodes that comes up, which is so cool.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, we are super appreciative of any way that you guys support us. Like we recently got just some nice words from one of our friends, Elliot, and that was really nice.
Yeah.
And so I guess we can move on to High of the Week. What is your High of the Week, Anna?
I feel like there are lots of things in the works in my life right now, but I'd say like High of the Week is I've gotten like a pretty nice template down for my grad school statements of purpose. And it's just a matter of like changing, of course, the school and what I want to get out of each school, but I'm very proud of what I have done so far. So yeah, I feel pretty accomplished in that. Most of the applications I'm doing won't be due until around February or March, but I also don't want to push it to the last second, so I'm giving myself plenty of time.
Procrastinate.
Yeah, I'm giving myself plenty of time.
With my grad school application, I did it over the course of like 3 months, or maybe more. So.
Gotcha. And like as someone who went to university and had a transfer admission guarantee, because I went to community college before that, I didn't have to necessarily worry about things like SAT scores or like letters of recommendation or anything like that. Whereas now it's having to make sure I have all of the proper criteria available and all of the resources.
Do you have to do testing? Seminary people are lucky. We usually do not have to do testing at all. I did not.
No, none of the programs I'm applying to require the GRE, because frankly speaking, I'm not a great test taker, and the least amount of tests I need to take to do things, the happier of a human I'll be. So none of my programs are requiring the GRE. Yeah, what's your highlight of the week?
Highlight of the week, I got paid yesterday. It's my first paycheck at where I'm working. I'm a substitute teacher in my county for a high school, and because I figured it would be like a good thing to do while I save up money for grad school. And actually, yeah, I live in an affluent county, so it is pretty good money, and it's also, like, a substitute teacher is actually weirdly, like, really needed right now because of the world that we're living in with COVID. Like, I feel like teachers are a lot more quick to take off if they're sick and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, honestly, my first paycheck, though, it's more money than I made in a whole month during my service year. So,
That sounds incredibly nice.
Yeah, I love my
service year. I hope this isn't a mistake. Yeah.
Loved my service year, but definitely glad to be making, like, actual money.
100%. And you get to be at home, like, living at home and everything, too, so I'm sure that's going to start to add up as grad school for you draws closer.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank y'all for listening to this episode, and we'll see you in the next one, which is a Bible Dyke deep dive on the Book of Revelation!
Yes, we are so excited about it. I'm so excited to start researching, and we are also going to be very excited for y'all to listen to that one. So stay tuned for it. Bye, friends!